He arrived as a nobody, dust on his shoes, sunburn on his brow, and a second-hand cassock faded from years of use. No procession, no motorcade, no fanfare, just a worn leather satchel, a passport under the name Brother Mateo, and a one-way ticket into the heart of Burkina Faso. To the villagers of Wagadugu, he looked like another foreign missionary sent to offer prayers, maybe a little rice, and vanish by sunset. But what they didn't know was that this man, stooped, quiet, and listening more than he spoke, was none other than Pope Leo XIV, the supreme pontiff of the Roman Catholic Church, Undercover. The decision had not come lightly. In a private chamber buried within Vatican stone, he had slammed his hand against a polished table, eyes welling. "We cannot fix the world by speaking from balconies," he had said. "We must go where the wounds are still bleeding." And so, against the advice of his advisors and in total secrecy, he crafted a plan. He would go not as a ruler, but as a witness, not to teach, but to confess. The first few days were a whirlwind of quiet revelations. He stayed in a clay brick room behind an old church. Every morning he rose before the sun, swept the courtyard, and shared cassava porridge with the other brothers. He met a boy named Adama, selling water from jerry cans. Adama asked him why he dressed like a priest but spoke with the voice of a man who'd seen the world fall apart. "Because I have," the old man answered. Later that evening, he watched an elder woman sit beneath a baobab tree, humming a hymn in a language he didn't know. He asked her the meaning. She smiled. "It's not for your tongue to say, it's for your heart to feel." But behind every smile was an unspoken ache. He saw the scars that didn't bleed, children too thin, schools without books, sacred traditions turned into museum pieces. One night, he knelt alone and whispered into the dirt, "How did we stray so far from the gospel?" That question didn't haunt him. It provoked him. Because buried beneath the ritual and robes was a truth he had long known, but never dared face fully. The church had walked beside the conqueror far too often. And if redemption was ever possible, it would not be declared in marble halls. It had to begin in red soil, in whispered songs, in the eyes of people who had every reason to stop believing. Unseen and unguarded, the Pope in disguise took his first step not toward power, but toward penance, toward truth, toward something far more dangerous than criticism or scandal, toward justice. And no one in Wagadugu suspected a thing. They called it the corridor, a dusty highway that sliced through the gold fields of Burkina Faso. But there was no gold for those who lived along it, only poisoned rivers, shattered lungs, and the sound of machines that never stopped humming. Father Paolo sat in the back of a creaky pickup truck driven by a wiry man named Issa. Next to him, Adama, a wiry, sharp-eyed teenager who had taken a liking to the mysterious old priest. "You sure you want to see this?" Adama asked, voice tight. Paolo nodded. What they found wasn't a mine. It was a wound. Deep and gaping, carved into the earth by foreign hands and foreign machines. A garrison of white SUVs and corrugated metal buildings guarded the perimeter. Soldiers, none of them Burkinabe, manned the fences with rifles. Inside the pit, shirtless men swung pickaxes, barefoot, bleeding. Children carried ore on their backs, dust covering their skin like a second coat of ash. And the air, thick with mercury and silence, Adama muttered. "The companies say they bring jobs, but those men down there? They die at 40, their kids can't read, and the water they drink, it glows at night." Father Paolo gripped the cross under his robe, not for prayer, but to remind himself this wasn't hell. This was earth, and it was real. He scribbled furiously in his journal. "This isn't God's silence. It's our complicity. We blessed their governments, we signed the memorandums, we smiled beside the thieves. We let this happen in Christ's name." Later, he was taken to a village near the mine. The children had skin rashes. The women miscarried, often. The local priest had left months ago, citing safety concerns. In his place stood Sister Alina, who had refused to leave. "They promised a clinic," she whispered, mixing powdered antibiotics. "All we got was a donor plaque and a stack of paperwork. We turn away 3 out of 5 patients. The rest, we bury." At night, Paolo walked alone to the river. He dipped his hands into the water. It burned. Not from heat, but from the chemicals. He wept, not the tears of a pope, but of a man who realized he had been shielded too long by marble walls and perfumed halls. Adama joined him. "They think Africa's poor," the boy said, "but we're not. We're stolen from." Paolo turned to him slowly. "Who taught you that?" "My grandfather. He was a griot, before they took his voice." That night, Paolo didn't sleep. He pressed a button on a small recorder he had hidden in his satchel. Click. His voice low, he spoke into the dark. "What I've seen here is not misfortune. It is manufacture. The mines are mapped in Paris. The contracts are signed in London. The profits go to Zurich, but the graves are here. Here in the dirt, here in the blood, here where no bishop ever comes." He ended with a whisper. "And the church has been too quiet. That ends now." The seminary in Bobo Dioulasso sat quietly beneath the shade of ancient baobabs, trees older than the cathedral towers that loomed beside them. Father Paolo walked its cracked stone corridors alone, the murmurs of young seminarians drifting, like smoke through open windows. Inside, a classroom swelled with tension. "What if the cross we carry isn't ours?" a voice said in accented French. "What if it was forced into our hands by the same people who took our drums?" It was a question that struck like thunder in the pit of Paolo's stomach. He stood quietly in the back, unnoticed. A young man, barely 20, stood defiantly, his eyes blazing. "Is this our faith?" he asked again, "or their control dressed in robes?" The room erupted in debate. Some students defended their studies, others echoed the pain. One held up a Bible with both hands and said, "I love this book, but they brought it with gunboats." That night, Paolo wandered to the edge of the city where a colonial prison had been converted into a museum. The rusted iron gates still bore the scars of shackled history. Inside, dusty plaques narrated only fragments, names of missionaries, dates of conquest, sanitized memories. But the cells whispered louder. A local curator, a young woman named Diara, led him through the hallways. "These walls once echoed with prayers," she said. "Not to Christ, but to ancestors, until the drums were banned." Later, Paolo asked to visit an old griot, one of the last memory keepers of a tribe long displaced. The elder's voice was raspy but proud. "When they couldn't burn our bones, they burned our books. They renamed our rivers, our children, our gods." Paolo sat in silence. Shame wrapped around his neck like a collar. The elder pointed at his chest. "You wear the cross, but do you carry our story?" In a nearby village, he reunited with Sister Alina, who now ran a makeshift school by day, clinic by night. Over bitter tea, she leaned in. "They took our drums, Father. Now they say we can't pray loud, that silence is holy, but ours was always loud, always dancing." Paolo felt something shatter within him. He stood, walked outside, and stared at the moon, then fell to his knees in the dirt. "We baptized souls beside whips," he whispered. "We built altars on stolen ground. We asked them to forget their names in exchange for salvation." That night, he returned to his journal, but didn't write in it. Instead, he pulled out a fresh parchment and began drafting something else. Not a sermon, not a speech, a doctrine, handwritten, sealed in wax, a document calling for a radical confession from the Church, the endorsement of cultural restitution, the removal of Eurocentric theology as the global standard, and the recognition of African spirituality not as folklore but as sacred theology in its own right. He signed it only with his seal. No name, no title, not yet. The community hall was nothing more than a concrete slab with wooden poles holding up a corrugated roof. But that night, it became a chamber of truth. Candles flickered in glass jars, casting long shadows over faces worn by decades of deception. Farmers, teachers, activists, and elders gathered, not to complain but to bear witness. And Father Paolo, still unknown as Pope, sat silently among them. One woman stood, her voice rough with smoke and memory. They fund our elections with one hand and buy our land with the other. They speak of stability, but their soldiers sleep in our forests. A teacher followed. They say our leaders are corrupt. Maybe. But who corrupted them? Who trained them in Western universities and handed them offshore accounts? The wind stirred. Overhead, the distant hum of a drone pulsed like an omen. Eyes shifted upward. That's the new colonizer, someone whispered. Silent, watching, coded in a language we don't speak. Paolo's heart beat harder. He had read about this from Rome. Strategic partnerships, counter-terrorism alliances, development loans. But none of the glossy reports captured the fear in this room, the grief, the fury. He looked at Adama, who sat cross-legged, beside him. The boy's jaw was clenched. Last year, Adama whispered, my cousin was taken. A raid. They said he was part of a rebel group. He wasn't. He was just loud. Paolo bowed his head. In the days that followed, he walked through markets where foreign investors had replaced elders, through villages where new roads led only to mines, not schools. He visited a bank that offered no loans to locals, but transferred billions in profits to offshore accounts, and always, he was reminded, this land was rich, but its people were still paying interest on their own gold. That night, he opened a line on his encrypted satellite phone. Russo, he said. A voice answered. Cold. Calculated. What are you doing? I've seen the drones. I've seen the stolen voices. I've seen the foreign flags flying above African soil. You're going too far, Leo, Monsignor Russo snapped. The Church cannot be seen meddling in geopolitical matters. These are sovereign issues. We don't take sides. Paolo's voice dropped. Then maybe we've never gone far enough. Silence. He continued. If we only speak when it's safe, we're not shepherds, we're salesmen. And I refuse to sell silence anymore. He ended the call. That evening, Paolo gathered the youth of the village. He spoke not as a priest, but as a witness. You are not pawns in someone else's game, he said. You are heirs to kingdoms older than theirs. Don't let them tell you your dreams are too loud. A cheer rose, not wild but grounded, not in rage but in recognition. In the dark, Paolo lit a single candle and placed it on the altar. But this time, it wasn't for ritual. It was for memory. Let the Church, he whispered to himself, become not a shield for the powerful, but a mirror for the wounded. The moment of truth. Pope reveals his identity, speaks at the Vatican, announces sweeping reform but leaves one final promise open. The morning of his departure, the village gathered in silence. Word had spread that the old priest who never raised his voice had packed his satchel. Adama stood closest, his brow furrowed. You sure you don't want to stay for the music tonight? He asked. Father Paolo smiled and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. I'll carry your song with me. They embraced. Adama didn't know who he was hugging. He only knew he was saying goodbye to someone who had truly seen him. As the sun rose over the red horizon, a jeep carried the disguised Pope back to the airstrip. And within hours, the white-robed figure, now clothed again in the full regalia of Rome, stepped onto the marble floor of St. Peter's Basilica. The next morning, the world stopped. Screens flickered to life from New York to Nairobi. The Vatican called an emergency address. When the camera feed opened, Pope Leo XIV stood alone. No cardinals flanking, no choir swelling. Just a man with a voice made heavy by truth. He didn't open with scripture. He opened with silence. Then he said, I have returned from Africa. But I did not go there to preach, I went to confess. Gasps rippled in rooms across the world. He told them everything. Of the mines, the silence, the stolen tongues and twisted treaties. He named names, governments, banks, multinational giants. He declared a global audit of all Vatican economic partnerships. called for the return of every African artifact held in European institutions, and proposed a reparative doctrine, one where theology would be rewritten in local tongues, where colonizer liturgies would be replaced with indigenous rhythms of worship. And then he said it. The Church must stop offering apologies that soothe the guilty and start offering justice that heals the wounded. For centuries we blessed the thrones of power while the poor bled beneath them. That is over. He paused. The hall held its breath. I was sent to Africa as a pope, he said, but I became a student, a witness, a penitent. Then, without notes, he declared, Africa is not a continent to be saved, it is a voice to be heard, a wisdom to be honored, and starting today, Rome will listen. Thunderous silence followed, and then the line that would ripple across history scrawled across headlines, memes, and posters on protest walls. I did not go to Africa to preach, I went to confess. He looked directly into the camera, and this is only the beginning. The screen cut to black. In white letters, coming next, the resistance within the Vatican.